everybody. Bo Sandoval here, welcoming you to the third episode of the Keep It Simple Stupid podcast. We're joined today by someone who I think is a real public servant. He's someone who's a former Marine, a veteran, a law school graduate. He's also a former candidate for the State House of Representatives here in New Mexico in 2024, a business leader here in the state, a lifelong resident. He's a father, a grandfather, and I'm fortunate enough to call him my friend, and he's also the chair of the Veterans Military and Family Caucus. Please join us in this third episode as I'm joined by Frank Smith. Hope you all enjoy this episode and enjoy the discussion. Thanks for joining us. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on episode 3 of the Keep It Simple Stupid podcast. My name is Bo Sandoval, Congressional District 1 Vice Chair for the Democratic Party of the State of New Mexico. I'm joined by Frank Smith, the chair of the Veterans Military Family Caucus, and I'm so excited that he's on for our third episode ever, and really excited to have you here. So thanks for being here, Frank. I appreciate you.
Well, thanks, both. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So,
yeah, absolutely. So the whole point of this Keep It Simple Stupid podcast is to make sure we're talking about political issues in a way that are digestible and really accessible. We always like to talk about as a party meeting people where they're at. And I really hope this opportunity as a podcast or developing this podcast really helps really meet people where they're at. So thanks again for joining us. Would love to hear about your background, obviously as the chair as the Veterans Military Family Caucus. But beyond that, I'm just curious what really from your foundational interest made you interested in politics and got you involved.
you know, I think it really initially started at a very early age, like maybe when I was a teenager or something. There was a lot of political turmoil when I was a kid growing up, here in Albuquerque. You had the Vietnam War was raging, you had protests, you had, and then as I was, getting ready to graduate from high school and join the Marine Corps, the president, at the time, Richard Nixon, resigned in disgrace. And, then this new guy from that no one ever heard of from Plains, Georgia, was running for president. And as I was just kind of becoming aware of what was going around and stuff like that, that sort of shaped my early idea of politics and basically the differences between the two parties. On the one hand, you had basically criminals, and the other you had this kind of plain-spoken guy from Plains, Georgia, and stuff. So that kind of was the and meanwhile, we're just coming out of Vietnam and stuff. So I think that was really kind of what initially sparked my interest in that. And it was really just following current events at the time and stuff. So
yeah, and that's a pivotal time really in American history to be coming to age and kind of having your political awareness. So you were born here in Albuquerque or here in the States?
Well, actually, I was born in L.A. My father he was a Navy veteran. He'd gotten out of the Navy, serving in Korea, and my father was born here in Albuquerque. I was born in L.A., but we moved back to Albuquerque when I was about 2 years old and stuff. So I'm a native New Mexican.
Yeah.
I say born and raised, although technically I was raised in L.A. But
no, well, I
was
born in L.A.,
yeah.
Raised in New Mexico, certainly.
Yeah.
So I think that counts. And hearing that experience of people really embracing the conflict of the Vietnam War in the 60s and really back in that day and age, I think there's a lot of parallels, if you will, with kind of some of the conflicts today. But I'm curious, really, beyond that, did your parents have a political background, or was it really just this interest in current events that really sparked the fire under you?
No, I would say my parents were not really politically active or anything like that. This was just something that sort of, they were just busy raising a family, and stuff. And politics were not really discussed much at home. It was just something that, I sort of gravitated to, I think, kind of early on and stuff. But, a lot of folks from my generation were politically aware because, there was a lot going on. So I think that was, the birth of it.
Yeah, certainly. And that makes a lot of sense, especially trying to empathize with such a, contentious war at the times. And then I'm curious, beyond that, was that what inspired you to go into service? Was it kind of seeing the injustices of the Vietnam War and wanting to contribute your own good hand in it, or what inspired your path towards service?
Well, nothing as grand as that at the time. It was basically, there's a saying, that the home is a place you grow up wanting to leave, and you grow old wanting to return to. Mm. And for me, it was basically the cheapest ticket that I could get out of Albuquerque. I wanted to see the world, and I just graduated from high school. I was graduating from high school, and I didn't have anything and stuff. So I decided, I'll just enlist in the military, which at the time was not very popular because, like I said, it's right as Vietnam is winding down, and
And what year was it you graduated? Just for
1975.
1975.
So in Vietnam, we withdrew out of Vietnam just a couple months before I graduated from high school. So Vietnam was, for my generation, the draft and things like that were always in the back of your mind for young men growing up. But for some reason, I was drawn to the Marine Corps, and so as soon as I graduated from high school, I enlisted, and I went off to boot camp in San Diego, and from there, I spent a decade or so in the Marine Corps, and that's where really I started to see the value of service. I was kind of taught that in the Marine Corps, and then it's just sort of been a continuation since then.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long were you enlisted or
I was in the Marine Corps for 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah. Okay. I went in 75 and got out in 85.
And did you ever see active combat, or were you on tours, or what?
No, not combat. Like I said, the Vietnam War ended just about 2 months before I graduated from high school, and about 3 months before I enlisted. But the closest was, I was stationed with the Marines that went to Beirut, Lebanon in 1983 with the Marine bombing of the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, and stuff. So, not combat per se, but
Yeah, still out there in the thick of things. So, as somebody who, from a area of public service on the politics side, I think it is takes a tremendous amount of courage and really willpower to put your life on the line and really put your body on the line for a greater cause that is, your greater community is protecting the American way of life. So I just make sure I want to take the time to thank you for your service. It takes a tremendous, like I said, amount of energy and courage to really put yourself up to do that. I try and put in a lot of good work to make folks' lives better here how I can in my realm of public service, but I still just think it takes another beast, if you will, to so willingly and ably put your whole body and really life on the line for the country. So it's a type of gratitude I think we should have and be grateful for. So just wanted to extend that gratitude to you. So you come back 85, and what's your story looking like then? Was that when you wanted to engage in New Mexico politics, or settle down, try and figure out a family life, or what was?
No, one thing I noticed in the Marine Corps was the value of an education. Okay, and so the first thing I did when I got out was I went to college on the GI Bill. I graduated from UNM. I actually started off in a community college. My first 2 years were in a community college in North Carolina. I got discharged out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Stayed 2 years in North Carolina, went to community college there. Then I transferred to UNM, got my bachelor's degree from UNM, and then I went off to law school in Santa Clara, California, all on the GI Bill. So that was the first, that was my initial thing, was I wanted to get my education, because I think, I learned the value of an education then. If I'd gone to college straight out of high school, I don't think I'd have lasted the first year, maybe not even the first semester. I had no discipline. I was just, kind of a knucklehead from the west side of Albuquerque. And, I'd have done like a lot of my friends did in college. I'd have just started and then, kind of drifted away and gone off to other things. But so that was the first thing I did. And then after I graduated from...
And what did you get your degree in?
Well, I got my bachelor's degree in economics, and then I got a law degree from Santa Clara. Then I went to, then after that, I came back to Albuquerque. I opened up one of the first brew pubs in Albuquerque, brewery restaurant in downtown Albuquerque, and ran that for about 7 or 8 years. And then I got into the corporate side of business and stuff, and did that for about 20 years. And then I retired about 5, 6 years ago.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
retirement's always, well worth the wait, and I hope it has been for you. I hope you've been enjoying it. And then that's really where I think maybe we find ourselves more, and maybe you and I connected more in recent years, is on the campaign trail. I know you had ran for a seat for State House while I was also running here in Sandoval County for County Commission, and we crossed over at a few events and
Yes.
made each other's acquaintance. And so I'm curious, really, is that in between that retirement time that you found really the opportunity and I guess time, if you will, to get really politically engaged with Sandoval County and the Democratic Party in the state in general? Or?
Yeah, and that was sort of, like I said, I'd always had an interest in politics, and I always followed politics. And I always followed basically what's going on in the world. And that's one thing that they really emphasized when I was in the Marine Corps, was staying abreast of current events. And it, you would go before a promotion board, and not only would they would ask you questions about military tactics or any of these types of things, but they would also ask you questions about current events, what's going on in your community, what's going on in the state, what's going on in the United States, what's going on globally, and stuff. And as a Marine, you were expected to be aware of what's going on. So that was something that I learned in the Marine Corps, and I just kind of followed through. And I would always, just follow politics and what was going on, and develop, and slowly over time sort of sharpened my positions on where I was, and had a chance really to see the evolution of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party primarily, over the last, 50 years. So once I retired, then, I realized that this is my opportunity, that I can really sort of get engaged and get much more hands-on and active and stuff. So that's basically what kind of launched this chapter of my life, where I'm a lot more engaged politically, and it was a result basically that then I now had the time, to do it,
Right.
to devote, because profession and stuff, to be successful, you have to devote a lot of time and stuff. It doesn't oftentimes leave a lot of time for important matters like this, but you're busy, building a career and stuff. So once I finished with that, then I just decided to turn my attention to something else.
Yeah, and that's not to take away from anything, just to build on that. I think that's something I hear so often, especially from people in my generation and my age who have a desire to get engaged, but just lack the time, lack the real availability while they're, to your points, building careers, trying to build families, figuring out housing, if they can, muster the dollars to figure it out. And something you also said that kind of caught my ear was the evolution of the Democratic and Republican Party over the last 40 to 50 years. And I'm curious, just, maybe in general senses or maybe in more specifics, how have either of the parties evolved over the last 50 years in a way that, folks who weren't fortunate enough to live in the 20th century didn't get to see firsthand, and how does the political tenor of 50 years ago, and from your perspective, how's it shifted to today?
Okay, well, let's start with the Republican Party. I think where the Republican Party is today is the trajectory that probably started around, that's definitely started around the Reagan administration. A lot of what we're seeing today is just the arc that the Republican Party has been on since the early 80s. So the rise of MAGA it's not surprising when you look at it in a historical sense. This is exactly where the Republican Party has been headed, and this is exactly who I think the Republican Party is. I believe that the Republican Party is MAGA. These seeds were sown in the Reagan administration. The Democratic Party, their trajectory is not as straightforward. It's a little bit more scattered. It seems to me it sort of starts and stops, and I still think that in many respects the Democratic Party is trying to find its footing, and I think that the results of this last election, last presidential election, are definite signs that that's the case and stuff. So, we have a lot of soul searching that we have to do, the Democratic Party. But I'm confident that we'll find our footing. But we've got to get focused.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I will say for the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a focused party. They have their few issues that they want. They hone in on those. They keep the message very, very simple, and they hammer it and repeat it over and over and over. And it's been basically the same message for the last 40 or 50 years. So Democrats need to find their footing.
Yeah, I look, as somebody who is still trying to reconcile with the 2024 election, and still, I even remember my sophomore year of high school when Donald Trump lost to Hillary Clinton at the time. Just the, I think a lot of folks.
I'm sorry. Did you say your sophomore year of high school?
Sophomore year of high school, I remember quite clearly. I was very surprised that just the brazen characteristics of a caricature billionaire. That if you were to sketch a comic book drawing of a billionaire, you would draw someone who's 80 years old, spray tan, orange paints their face. Fake blonde, toupee, comb over, writes their name in all capitals on golden buildings, and it's really crushing to me that we have, to an extent, you could argue as a party or even as a country, fallen so low to have not only allowed somebody of that character, of that quality essence to be elected once, but then again twice to the presidency. It's really heartbreaking to me. Not just heartbreaking, it's more disappointing than anything. I think we as a country have better, more unified values than just ego and just brazen personality that the president loves to engage in. So when you talk about the vision of the Republican Party, I couldn't agree more. To me, MAGA has kind of drawn out more of what some of the policy interests and base have always really been interested in. So not to go back, but I'm curious really what made you choose the Democratic Party. I know the times of Nixon stepping down over the Watergate scandal were pretty big, but I'm curious if there are any other tangible interests that made you want to be a Democrat as opposed to a Republican. I know talked about kind of some of the trickle-down economics, but was there any, key rallying points that made you say, because now you kind of talk about the disunity or lack of organization. I couldn't agree more right now with the Democratic Party, but was there a time when that unity was front of mind and something about the Democratic Party that brought you into them that maybe resonates in your story?
Yeah, I think, one thing I started to realize is that in a lot of respects, the Democratic Party shares some of the core tenets of military service. And first and foremost, I think on that would be leave no person behind. To me, the Democratic Party has always represented the party that sort of lifts all boats, and a rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah. And that is, I think, what drew me to the Republican Party. It's the same ethos that you would have on the battlefield. You leave no one behind. You're there for your fellow service member and stuff. And I've always thought of the Democratic Party as the party that is there for working class people, for normal, everyday Americans. That the Republican Party always, sort of broke down in a couple of different ways. But one of them was you had your country club, Republicans, and the low taxes and the small government and less regulation and stuff like that. And that was always a big part of the Republican Party and stuff. But, for me, Democratic Party was the party of public education and the party of organized workers and, the party of unions and stuff like that. And, those were the things I think that attracted me most to the Democratic Party. When I was young, when I was, middle school or so, my parents got divorced. And my father had some issues and stuff. He actually suffered from PTSD, and and once my parents got divorced, I would say that he was not much of a provider. Uh, and my mother was divorced with 5 kids in the late '60s and early '70s here in Albuquerque, and she was able to raise 5 children on one salary. And the reason she was able to do that was because she was a union member.
Mm.
She was IBEW, worked at Sandia Labs, and the fact, because she got paid a fair wage and she had good benefits and stuff, she was able to raise 5 children in the late '60s and early '70s. And I didn't realize the value of organized labor and union wages. I mean, I experienced it, but I didn't understand, at the time. But once I got a little bit older and stuff, and I was able to reflect and look back upon it, I realized the only reason that she was able to do that was because she was paid fair wages and stuff. So, it's those types of things. And, like I said earlier, when I went to college and stuff after I got out of the Marine Corps and stuff, I started off, it was with the GI Bill, uh, which is a Democratic initiative from FDR.
Absolutely.
All the entire GI, the VA, everything that has to do with the GI Bill. I went to college on the GI Bill. I bought my first house on the GI Bill. I opened up my first business with a government loan, and stuff. So I saw that what the government and what good policy can do and how it can help individuals rise above their station and realize the goals and dreams that they have. So those are the types of things that I saw sort of firsthand and lived that really made me a Democrat.
Yeah, and I love that idea of, especially connected to your military service, about the idea of not leaving any man behind,
Mm-hmm.
of being dedicated to the collective good. I think the GOP in particular loves to speak to the praises of individualism and the praises of pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps and putting in the work yourself, and hoping that through equal opportunity that there's a fair shot at reasonable outcome. But I think so often we see so many folks who put in the work, put in the labor, and then get left behind. But I think that mentality you speak to, of no man left behind, no person left behind, of a military perspective, is so I couldn't agree more, really, about my interest as being a Democrat. I mean, it's about speaking to the folks who have the least, those who live on the margins, and really, need a helping hand, a hand up. Republicans like to talk about a handout or this, that, and the third, but I think we as a Democratic Party are about giving a hand up and helping people out so that people can have a bare, basic social safety net, and we don't leave any person behind. So I really, really could not resonate with that more. And then I'm curious what you think then, given that mentality that exists within the military, that mentality of all being on the same team for the greater good of country. What appeal do you think, and why do you think oftentimes our service members turn out to vote GOP as opposed to voting for the collective good, if you will, despite giving so much of their life to the collective good?
Right. So I think that there's a misconception that that the majority of veterans are Republicans, and the data would not suggest that. There have been a few studies on this. Rand Institute, I think, is the most in-depth and stuff. And actually, 49% of veterans are independent voters. And it's about 55% on post 9/11 veterans. So actually, the majority of veterans are independent. And then the remaining 50% or so are split between the GOP and Democrats. So, and when you really think about it, it's not surprising. It's not surprising. I served under Democrat and Republican commanders in chief. And the military in general is apolitical. We serve whoever the commander in chief is, regardless of political party. And we try to keep politics out of things as much as possible. And I think that, especially in my day and age, it was much, much more so that was the case. So, so that would be the first thing that I would say, that there, and it's not. So that would be the first thing. Veterans, military personnel are not overwhelmingly GOP. They're overwhelmingly independent. They're persuadable. They'll go whoever they think, whichever party they think is going to give them the best thing. And this is one of the things that I like the most about the Veterans and Military Families Caucus, is that we are there for veterans regardless of political persuasion,
Right.
and their families, and active duty military personnel as well, and stuff. So, that would be, I would say, the big thing right there is that they're really, the majority of veterans are independent.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to a larger sentiment of how many folks across the country are independent, and I think that probably greater so, especially in a service background like that, where folks who are in military really are obligated to speak to or really respond to whoever the commander-in-chief is, like you said, regardless of political affiliation. So I'm curious, within your position as VMFC, Veterans Military Family Caucus Chair, there's been a new initiative to expand to some of that independent decline to state outreach, and I'm wondering, there's been some talk about it in the news and conversations behind the scenes, so I'm curious if perhaps you can enlighten folks about the Veterans Military Family Caucus, and specifically the initiative to expand their reach to folks who are of independent backgrounds and not really affiliated directly with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party.
All right, thank you for that question, because I think it's a really important question. So, just a little bit of background. New Mexico had up until actually just last year, New Mexico had closed primaries. You could only vote in the Democratic primary if you were a registered Democrat. You could only vote in the Republican primary if you were a Republican, and stuff. And that was basically the way that it was, which is a minority of states do that. The majority of states have more open primary elections. But New Mexico passed the bill, Senate Bill 16, this past session, opening up primaries to DTS, or decline to state voters, or independent voters. In New Mexico, independent voters are called decline to state. They don't state a specific political party. So that's the trend going. Now, the interesting thing is that passed pretty much along party lines. Democrats in general were in support of it, and the GOP in general was opposed to it. But it passed. So now, with the next primary in June of next year, DTS or independent voters will be allowed to vote in either Democratic or Republican primaries.
And they choose the ballot of their choice.
They choose the ballot of their choice, exactly, and stuff. So, capitalizing on that, the Veterans and Military Families Caucus, we brought this up, and our executive committee voted unanimously to allow DTS or independent voters to engage with our caucus to advocate for veterans and military families. So we opened up our caucus to DTS voters and stuff. So the problem with that is that we are now in conflict with the Democratic Party of New Mexico, because the Democratic Party of New Mexico says in order to be a caucus, their bylaws state that in order to be a caucus member, you have to be a registered Democrat. So this is really, it's a question of inclusion.
Oh yeah,
is what it really is. And there are I have to say, the overwhelming voices that I've heard on this are supportive of it from other caucuses, and especially from a lot of our rural communities. They are very much in favor of this. That we need to reach out to independent voters in the state of New Mexico.
Talk about meeting people where they're at.
Talk about meeting, exactly.
Anyway.
I think 4 years ago, Trump lost New Mexico by about 12 points. And this last election, Trump lost New Mexico by about 6 points. So, on the surface, New Mexico looks like a blue state. but I would argue that New Mexico is a purple state. And there is an internal memo going around GOP, stating that all they need are about 160,000 votes. They need to flip about 160,000 votes in order to take the governorship next year. And their target are independent voters. So this is an opportunity, I think, for the Democratic Party in New Mexico, and I think nationally, to focus in on that and realize, look, I think Democrats in general are going to vote for the Democratic Party, and I think Republicans in general are going to vote for the Republican Party candidate. But that whole, almost 25% of New Mexicans are independent voters, and those are the persuadable voters. And the nice thing about our caucus is that, most people are very much supportive of veterans and stuff. And I think that the Democratic Party has the best message for veterans and their families. But we can't show them that unless we can, number one, talk to them about it and stuff and show them. And by inviting these independent voters into our caucus to see what we do and stuff, they can see firsthand and they can help firsthand. The Republican Party doesn't have caucuses, and they certainly don't have a Veterans and Military Families Caucus.
Right.
So those folks would have the opportunity where it's more than just lip service. The Democratic Party is the party that really stands behind veterans, and so for the Republican Party is the party that stands behind veterans. This is an opportunity for those independent veterans to see us in work and to join us in our efforts when we're advocating for that. So I think that this is a crucial step for the Democratic Party of New Mexico and for our caucus, and I think for Democrats nationwide.
So, and to clarify, this move for VMFC allows for membership of folks who are DTS into the caucus. They just can't have a voting presence to affect
Correct.
The rules or orientation of VMFC is that, but they still have a place and seat at the table to
Absolutely
to show up and engage. Is that how that works?
Yes. So what it allows for DTS or independent voters that share our values, that are aligned with our values, to work with us in our work, whether it's outreach, it's advocacy, it's working with state legislature, wherever that happens to be. At the same time, they cannot hold an elective office in our caucus. The chair and the vice chair and our CD vice chairs are all elected positions and stuff. So in order to hold a leadership position, you have to be a registered Democrat, and in order to vote, you have to be a registered Democrat. So it still preserves core democratic values and stuff, at the same time allowing them to work with us and stuff. So I think it's a really good balance between preserving what the Democratic Party is and who Democrats are, but also at the same time showing persuadable voters why we are the party that supports your values and stuff and is the best party for you. And this, I think, is not just for veterans, but we have the Black Caucus, we have the Young Democratic Caucus, we have various caucuses, and we have Native American Caucus. We have all these different caucuses that have a direct pipeline into various communities around the state of New Mexico. And this gives all of our caucuses the opportunity to reach those persuadable voters, because when I speak with other veterans, especially the fact that we're both veterans, we have something in common,
right.
Opens up those avenues of communication and stuff. And it's the same thing with our other caucuses. Our other caucuses have a direct pipeline into certain constituency groups around the state. And then they can take that, if they choose, if they don't want to allow DTS or independent voters in their caucuses, they don't have to.
Right.
It's everyone, they have their own choice. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of choice. But it allows us to listen to them, but not only to listen to them, but to invite them in to help us to advocate, for those things, shared beliefs and stuff. And I think that is the most powerful way that we can reach independent and DTS voters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, in my role as CD1 vice chair for the Democratic Party of the state of New Mexico, um, I can understand the opposing concern that might exist of a Trojan horse effect, if you will, of having folks who might not be engaged with democratic values entering the caucus and changing the rules. But to your exact point, without really that voting presence, all we are doing is opening up the door, expanding our tent, making sure that we can really, as we try and be the party of a big tent party we always try and talk about, this is the work that I think is needed to really build that tent and persuade some of those voters. So separate and aside from my position with DPNM, I think that is a tremendous effort, and I really appreciate the work you put in to do that, because that is how we win elections, in my opinion. Elections are won on the margins, and a lot of times it's those handful of DTS independent voters that you need to switch the margin one way or the other to, in our case, get Democrats elected. So I think that is really good work.
Yeah, and just, this is exactly, the whole Trojan horse thing, I think is a false argument. I talk to Republicans, I talk to independents. I talk to people that don't vote and stuff like that. And I don't know that they're going to, change who I am, and stuff like that. The mere fact that I'm near,
Right.
a Republican or something like that. I work very closely with the Republican that I ran against. Okay, who happens to be the Speaker of the House. The Minority Whip in the State House of Representatives and stuff. And I work very closely with him. There are some things that we align on. There are a lot of things that we don't. But together we can advance, things that are important to our caucus, veterans issues and stuff. And, I'm not going to become a Republican because I work with the Republican on certain things. And, I think that, inviting people in and showing them what we do, again, is the best way to convince people that, the Democratic Party is the one that truly shares my interests and the things that matter most to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that spirit of collaboration and the necessity to work together on issues we agree on is so paramount, especially in this day and age where we feel so divided and so oftentimes incapable about coming together behind issues we really support. So I think that is a really strong message, and it makes me wonder about how we can maybe translate it to a larger national level. I think when I talk to so many folks my age who are, when we talked about, lack the time to get involved, they also see just the tenor really of politics and the negativity and then the, unfortunate and really obvious overt division that exists when engaging in politics. And I think it's challenging because when you talk to people about issues, people want the same things. I mean, protected, respected, connected. People want to make sure they have a fair opportunity to achieve the American dream. People want to make sure that if they work 40 hours a week, they don't have to live in poverty. People want to make sure that our service men and women are taken care of when they go, to put their lives on the line to protect our country. So it's really disappointing and disheartening that we seem to have shifted away from some of that ability and crossover to work together. So I think the work you do is tremendous to hopefully taking one step at a time to try and reconnect and build that bridge that is so critical right now.
It's an interesting thing that I tell you that I think the most shocking thing to me on the last presidential election was the fact that Donald Trump won the popular vote. That to me, that was the most shocking thing about this. With the exception of 2004, Democrats had not lost the popular vote in a presidential election. I mean, since 1992, Clinton won it twice. In 2000, Gore actually won the popular vote, although he lost the Electoral College. George W. Bush won the popular vote in 2004, but that was an anomaly
Post 9/11.
because it's post 9/11. We're just coming, we're gearing up. We're in the middle of war and stuff like that. And you're not going to change commanders commanders in chief in the middle of a war, or certainly at the beginning of a war like that. And then, Obama twice, Hillary won the popular vote in 2016, Biden won in 2020, and then a convicted felon, adjudicated rapist won the popular vote in 2024. That should be shocking to every Democrat.
Yeah.
And we need to look at ourselves and find out why. So listening to independent voices is not going to hurt the Democratic Party. It's going to help the Democratic Party. This is what we need. Why did they vote for a convicted felon?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question. And unless we hear what they have to say and listen to what they have to say, we're doomed for that to happen again.
Yeah. No, and I think our inability to listen is something that is mind-bogglingly frustrating to me as a young person. Like I said, having the 45th president be Donald Trump and then the 47th president be Donald Trump is just so counterintuitive to me and so frustrating, to your point, that he is even capable of winning the popular vote. And I think that's a big part of why we're here, what we're trying to unpack, what we're trying to engage with. And a big point that I always bring up, I believe it was the University of Pennsylvania who did this study, is 9 million people voted for our first and only African-American president, Barack Obama, twice, and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. 9 million people. And I think what really disappoints me is a lot of our rhetoric, or at least it seemed in the 24 cycle, was to try and pigeonhole us into one side or the other in the best way possible that was most beneficial to either party, but it didn't necessarily speak to some of those, at least on the Democratic side, to the appeal of some of those 9 million people, who I'm sure some of which were veterans who go back and forth or persuadable voters. And I'm curious if maybe this is the $1 million question, we wouldn't be sitting here if we had the answer to it, but are there any, beyond engaging with independents, which is critical, are there any maybe broad messaging tactics or strategies that the Democratic Party as a whole needs to do a better job at to make sure that we're not losing the popular vote to someone like President Donald Trump, and can re-engage with some of those 9 million people who, again, voted for our first and only African-American president twice, Barack Obama, and then turn around and vote for this guy 3 times. It drives me nuts a lot of times when we like to, a basket full of deplorables. We like to talk about so many people on the right and who vote for Trump is irredeemable. And to me, maybe it's just my over-idealism, but I strongly believe that isn't and doesn't necessarily have to be the case. There's persuadable voters we can win over. So at the sake of filibustering, I'm curious if there's any really broad strategy or techniques that the party should be taking to make sure that we're not only playing on the margins in the popular vote, but we're decisively winning elections with popular votes for Democrats that stand up and represent ordinary people. Is there?
Yeah, I think that our message needs to be economic populism. I think that is the message that's going to resonate. Look, we need people vote their pocketbooks. And one thing that Democrats are not very good at, and the Republicans are very good at, is messaging. Democratic messaging tends to be policy oriented and stuff like that. And it's what's the message on crime? Well, if you want to stop crime, you need to look at the things that lead to crime: education, economic inequality, those types of things, substance abuse, and all that. And those are absolutely true. You can't address crime without looking at the root causes that cause the crime.
Right.
And our message is oftentimes difficult to follow. You need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this and this and this, and then it will ultimately end in, it'll help to drive down the crime rate. Okay? True. But the Republican message on that is lock them all up. And it's a simple message,
Right.
and it resonates.
Right.
Criminals should be held accountable. They should go to jail and throw away the key. Okay, it's a simple, powerful message. So I don't know necessarily how, what our, answer to that is, because we need to have an equally simple message. But, so messaging, and then they have the right-wing media messaging machine that runs 24/7 out there, hammering their simple things. Undocumented workers are taking your job. Crime's out of hand. We need to lock them all up. By the way, we need to deport all the undocumented workers. So, they're taking all your jobs, deport them. They're committing all this crime, lock them up and throw away the key. They're very simple, focused messages and stuff. And this is what we need to do. Look, Biden did a lot of really good things. He had a lot of really good policies and stuff. And the inflation that citizens voted that U.S. citizens were experiencing during the Biden administration were the results of coming out of the pandemic and stuff like that. And there's a lot that he couldn't really do about it. But we had some actually big wins during that. But we don't do a good job of I don't think that we do a particularly good job of messaging those wins.
Yeah.
When you have these economic packages that Biden passed and stuff, but we don't do a good job of touting them and taking victory laps. And I think that we need to do a better job of stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, our core message needs to be economic empowerment, economic populism and stuff. Good paying, and we've got that track record, but we don't do a very good job. Look, this is what organized labor gives you. Is an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, and good benefits and health care and affordable health care. And these are the issues that matter the most to the American people. And we just don't do a very good job of messaging that.
Yeah.
This is what's going on in New York City right now. You have the established Democratic, old guard, as you might say, trying to crush what's going on in New York City and stuff like that. But the message coming out of New York City is, make New York City affordable again.
Yeah.
That's the message. Mm-hmm. It's not about democratic socialism. It's about versus the Democratic Party, and it's not about the old guard versus the new guard. It's about the message that's resonating in New York City is make New York City affordable again.
Yeah.
That's the message, and it's a winning message.
Yeah.
Make America affordable again.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect opportunity for the Democratic Party because this massive tax increase that Trump is imposing with his import taxes is a perfect opportunity. It's a perfect opportunity for the Democratic Party to make America affordable again. That should be our message.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think to your point about simplicity, that's what makes Trump's message so universally appealing. Make America great again. Mm-hmm. You get, as the listener, the person receiving the information, you get to decide what great is. Yep. You get to decide when again was. So when America was great, if it ever was in your definition. And I think it's such a simple, brilliant marketing tactic that has been very beneficial to the GOP. And then you talk about our inability to message. And I just, as someone who's 24 and was so disappointed even in 2020 that, and really only until June 27th of 2024 that we were allowed to say that the emperor isn't wearing clothes, that part of the issue on that messaging, all the respect in the world to President Biden, was tremendous vice president, senator for 205 years in Delaware, did great. But we got to a point where it was very disappointing that we had a president who had aged, who was in a spot where some of the wins, some of the monumental wins that he was able to achieve on very marginal majorities weren't being able to be articulated in the party up until 107 days left in the election, arguably wasn't able to make the necessary decision to have a strong leader, someone who could, not strong leader, but an articulatable,
someone who can articulate and speak to some of the issues and accomplishments that were passed under the Biden administration. Then you talk about simplicity with Zoran and Cuomo's race. I mean, Zoran got to a point in his rallies where he was going to the rallies and starting off his talking points, phrases, if you will, and having the crowd finish them. Fast and free buses, freeze the rent, free and affordable childcare, the crowd would say. And I think that message of affordability is so paramount. And at least in my perspective, I think the Democratic Party loves to talk about affordability, loves to pay lip service oftentimes, but then so many people live paycheck to paycheck. We're still in a situation today where, despite the wonders of the Affordable Care Act, 50,000 people a year die because they can't afford health care. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the earth. We're not Nicaragua or Uganda or another developing country. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the earth. So to ever and continue to have these problems is really frustrating. And then you talk about the president's tariffs and how that is only exacerbating affordability. I'm curious if you can talk about how this new legislation or this new law that has been passed, the one big beautiful bill law, as it is now called, how that is not only negatively affecting working class people, but in particular veterans, because I think, to your point, GOP loves to pay lip service about how much they support veterans. How is OBBB impacting veterans here in the state and really across the country?
Well, this is part of, the unfortunate thing, or fortunate, however you decide to look at it, of this bill is the majority of the impact is not going to be felt until after the midterms. Most of this stuff doesn't take effect until after the midterms. And that's actually a really smart move on their part, because they're going to be able to by then it'll be back of mind. It's in a lot of respects, I think, back of mind now to a lot of people and stuff, what the implications of this bill or this new law are going to have. But in New Mexico, a state that relies so heavily on Medicare, and a big group of our veterans receive Medicare benefits as well, it's going to be devastating, and especially in our rural communities. Part of what this is going to do is to help facilitate the GOP goal of privatization of the VA healthcare. And I'll just talk about healthcare, which there's a lot of other areas with respect to military benefits and stuff besides just healthcare, but I'll just kind of focus in on healthcare for right now. Initially the goal was to cut about 83,000 jobs from the VA. Now, this is in addition to a year ago when the VA said that they were 35,000 employees short. They needed 35,000, so it really would have been a net loss of 110,000 or so. And so now they've kind of backed away from that and stuff, but they're going to allow 35,000 jobs or 30,000 jobs to sort of grandfather out, and as these people retire or leave, they're not going to fill those positions. So really, you're looking at over 60,000 positions that are going to be short in the VA. Then you're going to have these cuts to Medicaid that are going to be happening throughout the state and throughout the country. And so healthcare in particular is going to be very difficult. Now, ideally, what the GOP would like to do is to privatize all of that and to send veterans out into the community and get their health care there. But it's an already, especially here in New Mexico, it's an already overburdened healthcare system. And so, my wife had to change her primary care physician, and has been trying for the last several months to find one, and she can't find one. And she's not alone. There are other folks out there, a lot of New Mexicans that are having trouble finding a primary care. Our neighbor, it took her over a year to find a primary care physician, a new primary care physician. So the system is already overburdened. So, dumping veterans out into that system are only going to make it worse for veterans, but it's going to make it worse for everybody else because the system is already overtaxed. and stuff. So that's just one example of this, and this is not going to take effect until after the midterms and stuff. So it's incumbent, I think, upon New Mexico to act and to act now.
Yeah.
In anticipation of that. So I think there's at least one thing that we can do here in New Mexico that would focus in just on veterans that can help them with that. And that would be, I think that we need a coordinated care model in New Mexico that would help veterans to maximize their benefits and stuff. And the way that it would basically work is, once you come into, I would see that it would be run through the Department of Veteran Services. Okay, so DVS already has veteran service officers in most of the counties throughout the state, and I would look at expanding that to every county in the state and stuff. And then veterans can seek help, and right now things are sort of siloed. You want education benefits? Well, you go to, for me, I went to UNM, and I talked to a financial aid officer, and I signed up for my VA benefits and stuff like that. And if you want health benefits and stuff, then you go over to the VA and stuff. And if you want to get a GI Bill to buy a house, then you go talk to your mortgage lender and stuff like that. And you go to these different places and stuff to get various services. And a lot of this stuff is kind of word of mouth.
Right.
And the burden is placed on the veteran to go out and navigate the bureaucracy, okay, and find out where they can get the assistance that they need. And so, but the model that I would propose is that once the veteran, once you say you access education benefits, once you sort of get into the system, you would have a veteran service officer that will then sort of become your case manager. And they can say, okay, let's help you get your education benefits set up. And oh, by the way, do you have health care?
Right.
Let's look at getting you enrolled in the VA or whatever, and access your health benefits and have the bureaucracy doing that for them. And then and maybe you graduate from college and stuff and you get a job and stuff like that. How about have you looked into a GI Bill to get a home for a home loan? And you have a VSO that's actually orchestrating these different, because you have a lot of things, you have a lot of federal, state, and private entities out there that are there to help veterans. Mm-hmm. The problem is getting access to everything, and the burden is on the veteran to go out and do it. You might have somebody said, okay, well, go check, go sign up at the VA, and then that's it. The veteran go sign up for the VA, and then maybe over there they say, well, go over, to this place, and then, they go over there, and, or they call, or they try to get over there, and this way you would have somebody that is helping to orchestrate that for them. And it's got to be tracked, and once, so how long did it take you to get signed up for education benefits, and track it and measure it, because if we can measure it, we can manage it. But right now, I don't think that we have any way of actually measuring it. We can see where the loopholes are, where the roadblocks are, and then we can look at addressing it. So what I would like to see is a pilot program on a coordinated care system in New Mexico that maybe it's launched initially a 1-year pilot program in Bernalillo County and Sandoval County and stuff. The nice thing about that is you have about 40% of the veterans of the state of New Mexico that are in those two counties. You have urban, you have suburban, you have rural, and you have tribal veterans in those two counties and stuff. You have the VA Medical Center is there. A lot of the headquarters for some of these organizations are in Bernalillo County especially and stuff, and then run a 1-year pilot program. We can see how it works, and it will work and stuff, and then we can see what needs to be tweaked and stuff like that, and then launch it statewide. And this is not something that I came up with. This is being done in North Carolina, it's being done in Texas, it's being done in New York City and stuff, and these are, and especially in these times of limited, and look, our what's going on right now with cuts to the VA and stuff like that, and cuts in general, Medicare, Medicaid, and stuff like that. Whatever happens this year and next year and stuff like that, this is not going away.
Yeah.
This is the Republican Party. This is what they do. This is what they want, and stuff. And if it fizzles out or something like that right now, it doesn't matter. They're going to breathe. It's like Freddy Krueger. It's never going to die. It's just going to keep popping back to life, and stuff. So, it's this is something that I think New Mexico can do, and just this just happens to deal with veterans and stuff like that. But these are the types of things that we can look at and then implement statewide. One of the biggest things that one of the, I think, crowning achievements that veterans have here in New Mexico is the Veterans Integration Center, the VIC, which is down over by the VA Medical Center off of Gibson and I-25. And what the VIC does is it's a transitional housing facility for homeless veterans, for unhoused veterans, to help them transition from being unhoused into getting a permanent housing and stuff. And the VIC is they have about an 80% success rate from about 4 months to a year from unhoused veterans to having them into permanent housing.
That's awesome.
And stuff. And that is an ideal model that does it help veterans and their families? Absolutely, because not only are veterans allowed to stay there, but also their family members. So not only is it good for veterans, but it serves as a model, okay, that New Mexico can use for for all folks that are unhoused and stuff. That this is a system that works, and they provide mental health counseling, they provide substance abuse counseling, job training, and or job assistance and stuff like that. It's a all-in-one service and stuff that has a tremendous success rate that can be then looked at for all homeless folks in New Mexico and stuff. And this is the same type of thing that we can do with the coordinated care thing that I was talking to you about. We can target it for veterans,
right?
And so if we have the infrastructures already in place with the Department of Veteran Services, we can take that, make it more efficient, and efficiency will save money.
Yeah.
And it makes every dollar that much more, stretch that much further and stuff like that. And then if that works, then we can look at trying to do these things for other people in New Mexico to help, especially in our rural and tribal communities.
Right.
So, this is an idea, on things that I think that the Democratic Party can capitalize on. And, the nice thing is that, these are things that can grow from assisting veterans.
Yeah.
And that we can then expand those things out throughout the state.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about kind of navigating that bureaucratic spider web, if you will, I think that's what when we talk about the simplicity of the GOP appeal.
Mm-hmm.
When they talk about cut and waste, fraud, and abuse, a lot of times when people are navigating some of those systems,
Yep.
going to the VA, trying to figure out how they're going to get their GI grant or really accessibility to college, there's so many nightmares, if you will, going through the process of
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out just what you can do to get your basic services. And that's where it crushes me that they hit some of the appeal. But when I hear you talk about these proposals, it seems perhaps maybe at a time when 50,000 people a year are losing their lives because they don't have access to health care, 17 veterans commit suicide every single day, maybe the answer isn't to cut some of these critical services, but it's to modernize, expand them, make sure, to your point, they're as efficient as possible.
Right.
And then cuts really aren't the answer at a time when so many people are already struggling, and
Look,
most importantly, veterans.
Cuts are not the answer and stuff. It's like saying, the way to decrease crime is to hire less police officers. The way to increase education, or the way to increase, math and English and reading and writing in high school is to cut down on the number of teachers that we have. The way to increase healthcare is to cut back on the number of doctors and nurses and healthcare workers. That's their logic.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that is one way I suppose to do it, and stuff, but I don't know how it works like that. But so the true, Department of Government efficiency are things like I was talking about with coordinated care.
Yeah.
That's how you make the government more efficient.
Right.
Things like that. That's the key to efficiency, not cuts.
Yeah.
Not austerity.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's where we as a Democratic Party need to make sure we're, rather than getting on our heels on some of these issues, we're embracing them with how they really should be spoken about. Because, I mean, even the bureaucratic mess that can, just take place and having to renew licenses, having to renew, going through the process to renew different certifications for, be it, teaching, welding, going through the process to acquire and really make sure you have the zoning and land permits to build or develop a business or a home can be convoluted, but we need to make sure we're talking about efficiency in a way that helps people, because that's what the whole point of the Democratic Party is, and we can't buy into the premise that having a more efficient government is a bad thing.
Right.
Obviously, making cuts and ruthlessly approaching things with a chainsaw as opposed to a scalpel is really inappropriate in this day and age, and I think you speak to that quite well. Something that I wanted to touch on a bit more when we talk about really this economic populism and this service-based mentality that you talk about, making sure that we have services that help people. Are there other ways that really, I mean, for young people, men in particular, as a man yourself, obviously as a veteran, we talked about kind of some of that misconception that the GOP reels in a lot of, military support, but are there other ways perhaps that we can also be expanding our tent to folks who maybe haven't committed themselves to service, who are just lost in this political field, if you will, and don't want to engage, don't see necessarily the importance or the stakes that are existing in politics? Is there, and again, maybe $1 million question, is there a way that we can re-engage them? And you talk about economic populism. What does that mean maybe here in the state of New Mexico, in particular to folks?
It's interesting that you mentioned young men, young males, and it seems to me, and you might know the numbers a little bit better than I do, but that there is a shift among younger males towards the GOP. Although I think the real shift is more towards independence.
Independence. I would totally agree.
And stuff. But I think that there is this perception about a lot of young men, and I know my share. I know a fair share of younger men that are more aligned with the GOP, and I think again it kind of comes back to the issue of messaging.
Yeah.
The GOP, especially with respect to men, sort of market themselves as the party of strength, and that that Democrats are weak, that we're weak on crime, that we're weak on all kinds of things and stuff like that, which I don't think is the truth, but perception is reality.
Right.
And so, I think it comes back to a thing of messaging. I think I remember reading something about less young men are going to college now, more young women are going to college now than it was. And it's kind of been reversed, that young women are actually making more money than young men. And if you sort of took the GOP message of individualism and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, then I guess the takeaway from that would be, well, it's your own fault. You just get out there and work harder and you'll be just fine. So, man up, and let's go. But the politics of victimization are very powerful, and I think their message to these folks is that it's not your fault. It's them. It's them.
Yeah.
They're taking away your jobs. They whoever they are, fill in the blank.
Right.
But it's not your fault. You're good old American. It's some other people that are doing it, and that I think is their message, and it's a powerful message.
Yeah.
Because it gives people sort of a scapegoat.
Yeah.
It gives them a scapegoat. It's not your fault that you don't have a good paying job. We had those good paying jobs here, but those undocumented workers, they came in and they took your job.
Right.
When the reality is that they didn't come in and take your job. That CEO outsourced your job to another country because they could hire cheaper labor and then import the goods that you used to make and stuff. So it's not the CEO's fault. It's not the board of directors' fault. They're the ones that actually offshored the job.
Right.
Okay? It's that undocumented workers' fault that came in and took your job. So that's their message. And I think for a certain element of society, lower income GOP voters and stuff like that, that message resonates with them. We're not in this position because of our own shortcomings. We're in this position because of them.
Right.
Because of those other people, the others.
Yeah.
And like I said, just fill in the blank.
Yeah.
So
it's so frustrating to me, especially at a time when quite literally 4 human beings own more wealth than the bottom half of American society.
Yeah.
That's 170 million, give or take people. 4 people rather, own more than the bottom half of those folks. And it seems like so much of the rhetoric, often even between the Democratic side and the Republican side, is look at them, look over there rather than look up. Look up at the people who actually have all the money and the wealth. This is also at a time while not only do these 4 people own and control more wealth than the bottom half of America put together combined, but there are 9 human beings on planet Earth that own more wealth than the bottom half of the globe. 9 people who own more wealth than the bottom 4.5 billion people. And it drives me nuts that when you talk about economic populism and a need for folks to just desperately try and get ahead, that we are often pointing fingers at each other or over at the other side rather than just looking up oftentimes, because it's really frustrating how stagnant and absurd the economic wealth and inequality is, while people are just desperate and, to your point, are struggling, and rather than blame themselves for the sake of individualism, would rather blame fill in the blank. And a lot of times that becomes the migrant, the Democrat, people of different faith, people of different skin color, people who look different, think different, and that is antithetical to what we should be about as a country. So I'm just curious, and I think the answer is, we as Democrats are trying to be as hopeful as possible, putting in the work to 26 to try and cut the 47th president's term in half, hopefully, and regain the House. But there's a lot of stagnation, a lot of inability to consolidate behind a leader. And I'm curious, I've asked in previous conversations, and it's been hard to maybe identify a single person, but is there somebody you see in the Democratic Party right now, be it in the state of New Mexico or in the country in general, that we or you maybe identify with as a leader who speaks to the Democratic Party? Because a lot of times or I wouldn't say a lot of times, but right now in particular, it feels we are so factions still trying to find leadership that we're really undecided. And I'm curious if maybe you see someone who's a strong leader in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I don't know that there are a couple of people that I have my eye on right now and stuff like that, but I'm just, I'm less concerned on that right now than I am that there actually is I think a large groundswell that has that is building in this country in opposition against the current administration. And I am hopeful that at the end of the day the cream will rise to the top. But right now I think that so many New Mexicans and so many Americans are so active right now. They're getting out on the street. They're organizing. They're doing stuff. And right now, and so I see this really, truly as what I've always envisioned about the Democratic Party, and that it's a grassroots organization. And that it, as I mentioned earlier about rising. That the high tide, rises all boats and stuff. And this is, I think, the same kind of a thing where I think that the messages are are rising from the ground up. I mean, look at the crowds that Bernie Sanders and AOC were drawing in red districts in red states.
Yeah.
Just in the last couple of months and stuff, and it goes back. I think that their message primarily was one of economic populism. That's the message that's resonating in New York City. That's the message I think that resonated with them. So in addition to, and we have to be more. We can't be the anti-Trump party. I think
Agreed.
that we need to find our message, and like I said, I think our message should be make America affordable again.
Yeah.
I think it resonates and it will work, and it's simple, something along those lines. But right now I'm most excited about the grassroots organizations that I see, the groundswell that is happening, and a leader will emerge.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, and we'll go through the process and stuff. But I do think at the end of the day that we're going to put forward. Well, I mean, I guess I'm talking more for the
28.
Yeah, for 28
right.
and stuff like that. But I see this right now. I'm optimistic about where the Democratic Party is going to be in general. I'm optimistic where we'll be when the midterms come along, because I think that the winds are going to be blowing in our direction. Do we have the leadership? Do we have the focus to ride that? I think that remains to be seen. But the grassroots are there.
Yeah.
The people are there. They're active. They're engaged. They're motivated. We need leaders that can that will tap into that. Fortunately in New Mexico, I think we have a very strong leadership. In our federal delegation, in our state delegations and stuff. We're in Sandoval County. I think that we have some very strong candidates and very strong people in office and stuff. So, I'm optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, and I think just try and full circle this conversation if we can. That is why I'm so grateful you came on, because I think the grassroots work is actually what moves the needle on elections. It's people actually organizing, showing up and engaging by organizing a caucus, by making sure that we engage people into that caucus who aren't just already Democrats, but people who are independents and would perhaps participate if we were to meet them where they're at and actually do that rather than just talking about it. It's something that drives me so nuts.
And that's one thing. I mean, we're getting ready to start our a road trip that will start at the end of the summer and into the fall.
The VMFC,
the Veterans and Military Families Caucus, and we'll go out. The goal is to hit every county in the state and get out and talk to people and stuff. We're and we need to get out to community events, county fairs, and put up a booth and just talk to people.
Yeah.
And we need to go into red counties and stuff like that and talk to people, and this is and see what is it that they have to say, and especially, like I said, those, not to beat a dead horse, but especially those independent voters. We don't need to make them Democrats. We don't need to. What we need are their votes.
Yeah.
And we can only get their votes if we listen to them, hear what they have to say, and we address their concerns.
Right.
And I think that's the value of our caucuses, that we are that voice in the community. We have that in the community where we have something that, like I said earlier, it's something that we share, that we have in common with them. For us, it's veterans, where we can go out and talk to other veterans, and find out, and find out, what is it that they're looking for, and to show them that the Democratic Party is the party that truly cares. I think a lot of the perception that the GOP is so pro-military is that in many respects the GOP is pro-military industrial complex. And look, as a Marine Corps veteran, I like our aircraft carriers. I like the fact that we have stealth bombers and stealth fighters and stuff like that, but that's not what helps military families and
Yeah.
veterans and stuff like that. Support for a lot of that stuff is vital in this day and age and stuff like that, and it's important and stuff like that. But supporting the military industrial complex is a completely different thing than supporting military personnel, veterans, and their families.
Yeah.
Those are two completely different things. So a lot of people, I think, oftentimes get that part confused. So that's one thing that I think that the Veterans Caucus can get out there and deliver that message to veterans, especially those independent veterans, and show them that not only are we the party that has your best interests, but we actually want you to engage with us.
Right.
Because while we're out there advocating and stuff like that, we want you to join us and go up to the state legislature and testify before committees and in support of legislation that supports veterans and military families. We want you to help us write position papers on this. We want you to help write letters of support on this and engage with our legislators and stuff and see what it is that we do.
Yeah.
And see why we're effective. So, and we can only do that, like you said, by getting out there and talking to people where they are, and inviting them in. Not just telling them that this is what we do, but showing them and inviting them, come, join, be a part of this. You don't have to be a Democrat.
Right.
We can share the same values and stuff like that, but let's show you what we do, and you're welcome to join us.
Yeah. I really like the way you said that. I mean, I think it's a strong point. The GOP supports the military-industrial complex, whereas the Democratic Party, at least the people in large part, support the military themselves and the families and service members themselves who compose the military. And I think our whole effort of being inclusive, building a tent, starts with actually putting in the work to do just that instead of just talking about it. So I really appreciate the work and time you put in. I think a lot of what gets forgotten about these caucus positions and a lot of the work that goes into organizing is these are volunteer positions. You are utilizing your own time, your own effort, your own energy, and that, I think, speaks volumes to not only your character as somebody who's dedicated to service, but speaks to often the struggle and effort and energy that goes into organizing when you're working from an entire volunteer capacity and hoping that you have more volunteers come in that can be part of your Veterans Military Family Caucus. It can be challenging. So I want to thank you for that. And is there anything else that I maybe didn't cover in our conversation that you want to add in, or points we wanted to talk about? I know we were able to discuss and really challenge some of that perception, talk about ways that we can bring more people in, but I want to make sure I give you every opportunity to address maybe any topics we were in.
Maybe I'd like to say that if you're interested, you'd like to learn more about the Veterans and Military Families Caucus, you can visit our website, nmvets.org, and it'll give you an overview of what we do, ways to how you can reach out to us if you're interested in hearing more about us, or you'd like to join or to be a participant. So nmvets.org is the place to go, and then you can reach us through that. You can also reach us through Sandoval County Democratic Party or any county Democratic Party. If you just let somebody know, they'll know how to get in touch with us as well, and stuff. And we welcome all veterans, to join us and to see what it is that we do, and to or folks that support. You don't have to be a veteran. You can be a family member of a veteran or active duty military person, or you can just be a person that's concerned about veterans issues and stuff. So you don't have to be a veteran, like I said, necessarily and stuff. We welcome all. We're an inclusive organization, and we will find a place for you. And like you mentioned earlier, it's volunteer. It's when we go out across the state, these are veterans that are we pay for our own gas, we drive our own personal vehicles, we stay in motels and stuff like that. We pay for all this out of pocket because it's important work.
Yeah.
It's very important what we do, and and we do it, and we don't do it begrudgingly. We do it, because I can't think of a better way to spend our money than to than to support veterans and to support New Mexico in general.
Yeah. Well, that was really my last question. I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to give you your plugs, make sure people knew how to get in touch with you, but you're already on top of it. So yeah, Frank, I really appreciate you for sitting down to do this. This is episode 3 of the Keep It Simple Stupid podcast, wanting to talk about issues in a way that are digestible, simple, in a way that I think speaks to your story, in a way that I think lots of other veterans probably have similar experiences and similar stories. So yeah, Frank, thanks so much for being here again. I really appreciate you, and yeah, we look forward to having another conversation. And
Definitely.
Thanks for being here for episode 3.
Bo, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Hey everybody, Bo Sandoval again. Wanted to thank you for sticking around to the end of episode 3 of the Keep It Simple Stupid podcast, where our whole goal is to make sure we're talking about politics and policy in a simple, digestible way. Thank you all for listening to episode 3 with Frank Smith, the chair of the Veterans Military Family Caucus. If y'all enjoyed or have any feedback, please feel free to give us a comment, give us a like, share with a friend and family member who may not have heard this episode, and please tune in next week to episode 4. Hope to see you then. Hey, before you leave, just wanted to personally invite you on to the Share Our Story series of the podcast. Every other week, we're going to be hosting someone from our community to hear a bit more about their personal story. You can see some of the details on your screen right now. If you're interested in joining, we would love to have you on the podcast. Sign up at that QR code there or right down below at the link. I'd be thrilled to have you and hope to see you soon. Thanks for listening.